Brooklyn by bringing on a guy who has no idea what he's talking about. Did me a favor in that respect, because now more people know about this story. I'm very grateful for that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, like, when they brought the Brooklyn-based journalist on, that, I mean, at that point, it was like a triple or, like, quadrupling down at that point. Like, they had already doubled down with, like, all their absurd claims. I mean, like, even to the point when they they did that first clip where they got mad at you for the tweet that you sent in response to Cenk's extremely insensitive, offensive comments regarding Israel and Palestine.
That's how it started. Yes, this all begins. This whole thing begins with a single tweet from me to Cenk saying, "My God tells me that this is the worst tweet of all time." After he had talked about Israel and Palestine fighting over a sky god. So I said, "My God tells me this is the worst tweet of all time." That's how this actually all starts, and that then elicited their McCarthyite meltdown.
I liked what Caitlin Johnston said, which she's like, this tweet needs to be remembered and celebrated every single year. It's going to go down in history as like starting the biggest feud. But I mean, it really is, and it's been important to like maintain the focus on like the root cause of this story, right? I mean, like, sure, there's the tweet, but like really, it's this crazy disagreement on some of like the most important stories that we have going on today, be it Russiagate or be it what's happening in Syria at the moment. And it's been crazy to watch them continue to double down and lean into this, this scandalous like talking point that they're just regurgitating everything that the OPCW is saying. What was your initial reaction when you saw them bring on this fool to like again regurgitate OPCW talking points regarding everything that's gone on? Because you have done such meticulous reporting surrounding all of this, and for those of you who haven't seen, I encourage you all to go watch Aaron's videos on Pushback. You testified at the UN. You can watch that video. You go into so much detail to like watch this guy go on the Young Turks and give this absolutely horrendous analysis, if you can even call it that. It must have just been insulting and also just like utterly shocking.
I didn't think that they were smart, right? I started from that premise, but I didn't think that they'd be so stupid. There's a reason why no one's written a rebuttal to anything I've written on the OPCW scandal. I've written at least 10 articles. I've done countless more videos. I've testified twice at the UN, including one presentation that was just filled with like facts from the investigation. There's a reason why no one's written a rebuttal.
Presentation?
You can't rebut me on the facts because the facts here are just so overwhelming. This was a cover-up, and it's documented. And all the evidence undermining the case for this being a chemical attack by the Syrian government is just laid out. And the fact that all that evidence
Libya or Syria
makes that case even stronger because it shows that powerful positions didn't want that evidence to come out. So there's a reason why no one has ever written a response, because they can't respond to me on the facts. This guy who they brought on has written one article when it comes to Syria and the OPCW. It wasn't even about Duma, the incident that I'm focused on and that this whole thing is about. It was on a broader issue of the OPCW in Syria. But the amount of it that concerns Duma, what I've been covering, is 4 paragraphs. So when I saw that they brought on a guy whose pretty much only output on this story, except for 4 paragraphs, is just melting down on Twitter. He's a Twitter troll. I couldn't believe how dumb they are. And the fact that they would put him forward and like present him as some kind of authority who can like weigh in on toxicology, ballistics, engineering, chemistry, who can like sit there and explain to us why he thinks the world's top toxicologists who were consulted by the original investigation and whose findings were suppressed, why they're wrong and they made faulty assumptions. It's just like, it's a self-parody. And it's just ridiculous. It's one of the funny, I can't think of another time where someone gets to go on like a major platform, speak for 40 minutes on an issue that they have done no work on and have no credentials in, especially something as complex as chemical weapons.
Yeah.
This is not like we're talking about like, I don't know, like Britney Spears' crotch, which is what Cenk and Anna used to cover in the videos that they're now deleting.
Yeah,
so
great analysis.
but look, they were deranged enough to lie about me in their McCarthyite juvenile meltdown. They were stubborn enough to refuse to simply apologize and say we have no evidence and retract. And I guess they're just like deranged enough to then try to quadruple down with a Twitter troll to try to cover up for their initial slander. It's hilarious. It is. Like it's been serious. It's caused me some you know, again, it's not nice being slandered, and it's like it's what they're doing is really, it's just it's malicious because they're trying to basically get me investigated and like taint me with like Russia, you know. It's pure McCarthyism. But I can't pretend to say that it's also not hilarious to see them just continue to own themselves and expose really just what they're all about, you know, and what are the fault lines in media. And Russiagate really was a fault line. Like, Russiagate was a litmus test for people in media as to whether or not you can think critically. Because we got so much propaganda. On the surface, there was this, like, partisan utility that it was going to bring down Trump. So it was like, you know, to go against it on the surface looked like you were, like, somehow crossing a line because you might be supporting Trump. But in reality, it was based on bullshit. It was a propaganda campaign. And even if you cared only about partisanship, what could be a bigger gift to Trump than turning his resistance into a bunch of deranged conspiracy theorists who believe that he's owned by the Kremlin? So it was a litmus test, and the Young Turks completely failed that. They decided to turn themselves into like a lower budget version of MSNBC. People like Jimmy Dore and I, and you, and my colleagues at the Gray Zone, and you know, a couple of other, you know, small outlets, we pushed back, and of course we were vindicated. And I think there's bitterness around that. They look like idiots, and getting duped by really the dumbest conspiracy theory of all time. The dumbest, one of the most dangerous. So I think that also is behind this latest round of attacks, and just they continue to dig their own hole, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying watching it.
Were you on the Young Turks, or they did a video of you like debating Russiagate? Was it?
Yeah, Cenk brought me on. You know, this is why, by the way, this is one of the reasons why I donated to Cenk's congressional campaign.
Yeah, I remember you said that. Yeah.
Even though, so if he thinks I'm paid by Russia, then that means that Cenk was paid by Russia too. So maybe he should get investigated for an FEC violation or something. But no, this is one of the reasons why I donated to his campaign is because even though he was a Russiagate loser, okay, at least I saw in him someone open to debate, you know, and open to dissenting points of view. He had me on, he had on Mike Tracy, he had on Glenn Greenwald. You know, he had Jimmy Dore in his studio making shows from there, and Jimmy Dore was debunking all the propaganda that Cenk was putting out every day about Russiagate. And so I saw, at least in Cenk, even though I think he lacked critical thinking skills and was a dupe, at least he was open, unlike other, you know, major media outlets, to a dissenting point of view. So, and also he was for Medicare for all. So I just thought this guy deserves our support, and maybe he'll grow. Yeah. But look how that turned out. Yeah. So yeah, he did bring me on. We had a very cordial conversation. I was extremely fucking polite. I was in his studio, and I appreciated that he was willing to have me on. So I didn't want to be, you know, too kind of like too in his face, even though I think he again fell for the dumbest conspiracy theory of all time. And it was cordial. And before this whole thing, I've made fun of them a couple of times on Twitter for falling for Russiagate because it's funny. Like, it's fucking funny that you're, like, presenting yourself as this, like, progressive Bernie Sanders.
The home of progressives.
Home of progressives, while falling for one of the biggest neoliberal scams of all time, with one of many aims being at protecting the power and privilege of the DNC neoliberals who lost to Trump, and then used Russiagate to preserve their own power and privilege, and then used it, by the way, which was completely predictable, to undermine Bernie Sanders during the 2020 primary. We all remember when Bernie Sanders got Russiagated. And that, I think, by the way, was a big wake-up moment for many people on the Bernie Sanders left who had either gone along with Russiagate or just kind of kept their heads down. They saw the agenda that it was serving. This was never about challenging Trump seriously. This was about the failed neoliberals aligning with the national security state to undermine anyone who they deemed to be a threat to their very, very narrow sense of how the country should run. And in the case of the Democrats, their own power and privilege. So yes, we had that nice conversation with Cenk. You know, he debated me. Even when Russiagate was used against Bernie Sanders, it still didn't sink into his head what this thing was about. And this McCarthyism, is a logical extension of that. If you spend 4 years parroting DNC talking points that everyone who the DNC doesn't like is a Russian agent, you're naturally going to transfer that to someone like me, who's a journalist actually doing their job. And in this case, not just challenging Russiagate, but exposing just some of the propaganda used to justify the U.S. dirty war in Syria, one of the most expensive dirty wars in U.S. history.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I heard you say when this whole feud initially began was surrounding, it was right when you came back from Syria on your most recent visit, and you talked about the fact that when you're in Syria and you're surrounded by the people who are impacted by this, this brutal imperialist, foreign policy and these cover-ups, and, you're on the ground hearing stories, meeting people who are close with, friends with, families with the individuals who were killed in this attack, it really minimizes the characters of people like Cenk, Anna, and it puts it all into perspective as to like how meaningless their lives are in the grand scheme of things, because you're the one who's on the ground there reporting, you're the one who's digging up what's actually happened, and to a certain extent there are people trying to hear out the actual reporting. You've been given some opportunities to air those out on the international stage, so that was really interesting to hear. And if you want to talk a little bit more about that, in your trip to Syria, because it was incredible hearing everything you did there and everything that you've been constantly uncovering.
Yeah, I mean, as you said it very well. When you're there, you realize how irrelevant all these people are, who spend their time promoting the propaganda that was given to them in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC about the dirty war in Syria. You see for yourself the reality of what this war was, where the U.S. and their allies, the worst dictatorships in the world, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, decided that they were going to be the dictators of Syria, that they were going to destroy Syria if it meant overthrowing a government that was disobedient, it's inside the axis of resistance, supports Hezbollah, is very close with Iran. So the aim here was to basically destroy a disobedient state, and if that meant flooding Syria with all the weapons in the world and jihadist contras from all around the world, there's this talk about this being a Syrian civil war. It's true, there certainly were Syrians who fought against the government, but a lot of people who were in the quote-unquote rebels were not from Syria. They'd come to wage jihad, and they were very financially, very nicely compensated for it financially by all the money of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, to come around the world to Syria to do this. So you see the reality of what actually happened in this country, where they defeated one of the biggest and most expensive dirty wars in history. But now you see the impact of that. The country is in ruins. Infrastructure is destroyed. Before the war, Syria had among the best healthcare, education, food production, calorie levels in the Middle East. Okay, because the government controlled agriculture, so food prices were affordable, and they produced their own food and their own goods, all these other things. All that is now in ruins. There's millions of refugees. And then you come back and you see people attacking people like me and other people who were there, who I accompanied, a delegation of peace activists, attack people who go there on the ground to see for themselves the impact of what their government did. So you just see this. You just see how corrupt these media pundits are, who try to justify just the worst atrocities and the worst crimes, and who then continue it by ignoring the sanctions that are preventing Syrians from rebuilding. Like, the U.S. has, after the U.S. lost the dirty war, it does what it always does when it can't win by military force. It reverts to economic warfare by strangling the civilian population and making them so that they'll just give up and turn against their government.